Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, July 1st. It's also a great pleasure to be joined in our studio by Christina Nolan, who is running for the U.S. Senate in the Republican Party primary. The winner, of course, will go on to compete in the general election in November. Ms. Nolan, thank you very much for making the time for our conversation today.
Andrew, thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Good to be in southern Vermont.
All right. Well, Christina Nolan, for those who haven't heard much from her yet, served as the United States Attorney for the District of Vermont from 2017 to 2021. Before that, she was the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont. She is from Burlington, attended Rice Memorial High School, graduated from there in 1997, went on to the University of Vermont, where she graduated in 2001 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and History. From there, went on to Boston College Law School, where she graduated with her law degree and was a senior editor of the Boston College Law Review. Very impressive resume.
Thank you.
Anyway, welcome again to the News Project. Really glad to have you here. And I guess I thought, just to kind of get us started, tell us, why did you decide to run this year? What prompted you to throw your hat in the ring?
I think it's time for a new generation of leadership in the country and certainly for Vermont. Senator Leahy, I thank him for his service. I thank his wife Marcelle for supporting him all these years. He's retiring. There's an open seat. And I think Vermonters are ready for a fresh perspective, new energy, new generation of leadership in Washington that understands the needs of Vermont. I'm a born and raised Vermonter. I feel passionately about advocating for this state, serving this state. That's why I became U.S. Attorney. And I want to go to Washington and get something done for people, restore bipartisanship, and get things done.
Well, we'll all be happy to see that happen.
We will.
I guess let's drill down then through some of the major issues you see facing the state at the moment. Housing is one area that seems to pop up repeatedly. So I guess I just wondered, if you were elected, what might be some of the initiatives you'd like to see advanced to improve our housing supply here in the state, as well as, I suppose, nationwide as well? Sure.
Well, some of this has to do with a state law issue, which is the Act 250 regulatory scheme. That needs to be modernized and streamlined. Now, I'm not running to be in the State House, but I think it's still something our federal officials need to be tuned into. I am very tuned into it, and we need to be talking about it. Particularly, the appeals process is too cumbersome, and the Act just needs to be modernized. It should not be more difficult to build affordable housing in this state than it is to build a $10 million home. Right now, it's easier to do that than it is to build affordable housing. The other piece of this crisis is inflation. Rents are up in Vermont and all over the country due to this 40-year record inflation. The cost of building is way up. A 2x4 costs $12.50 these days. Before this period of record inflation, it costs $3.50. Builders are building, but they're passing those costs on to the consumers. They're passing the cost of land on to consumers. And so we need to get the inflation under control in order to address the housing crisis, and that involves the federal government spending less money. Both parties are responsible for spending too much money.
Yeah, because it's one of the sticking points always seems to be when we talk about how we can reduce the federal deficit or, lower taxes or doing something. That means it seems to be very difficult to find a place where we can do that without impacting another program somewhere. For instance, I've heard a lot recently about how we have a need here in Vermont, and again, I'm assuming more or less nationwide, that mental health services need to be upgraded and improved and better funded. Mm-hmm. So how do we do that at the same time as we spend less money or try to be more fiscally prudent?
Well, a lot of money has been spent by the federal government over the last 2 years. I'm trying to be forward-looking about our spending, not backward-looking. But given the amount of spending that's gone on, Vermont has received a lot of money. There's excess funds in the general fund, the rainy day fund, the education fund. There has been, and I'd like to see some of that money going to mental health care, particularly mental health care for adolescents. I know from my time as U.S. Attorney and in my private law practice, I'm a partner at a law firm in Burlington, that there are not enough beds in Vermont for adolescents who are in acute, dangerous mental health crisis. And so I'm not against spending money, especially on the things we need it desperately for, like our adolescent mental health. And I think the state of Vermont should consider using some of that money to make mental health care access more available, particularly to adolescents. It's unconscionable that some of them are sitting in emergency rooms.
And not really related to that, but kind of connected in a way, the state has struggled for a while, it seems, to attract and retain younger residents here. I know in the past couple of years with the COVID pandemic, we've seen an influx of people coming into the state, but basically it seems like the demographic problem that's been talked about now for quite a while is still very much part of the mix here. How do you think the state could go about attracting younger residents to move here and also keeping folks who are from here and stay here?
It's a systemic structural problem in Vermont. We are close to becoming the oldest state in the country demographically. When I travel the state, this is the issue I hear. It's in top tier of issues I hear the most about. Concerns all across the economy, every part of the economy, every sector about attracting workforce. Part of the solution is going to be the housing approach to the housing crisis I just mentioned. The state may want to look at the cost of living and some of the property tax structure in the state, but that's again a state law issue. Talking about some of the other components though, I think we should be working. I think businesses in Vermont, and some of them are doing this very well, some of our innovative businesses should be working with tech schools and other schools in a partnership to be sure that when people are graduating, they know or are already working with a business on a job, a good job, a job that allows them upward mobility. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we should do is bring more people into this country legally. This is very much something I can help with as the next United States Senator. The process for getting a work visa, for becoming legal in this country, getting citizenship status is too cumbersome. I know from working in the federal government that there are efficiencies that can be found in the legal immigration process, and I will work to do that, and I know this is something we can do in a bipartisan way. Immigration enriches this country, but it also helps with our workforce problems, and it can help in Vermont. We need to look at childcare. We lost too many childcare centers during COVID. That is something that in a bipartisan way, I think the federal government could make some investments in to jumpstart the childcare sector across the country and in Vermont, working with the state. And then the other thing we need to think about is public safety. If Vermont is becoming less and less safe, and we are not going to attract people and families here when we have crime going in the wrong direction and overdose deaths going in the wrong direction.
So is the answer to that, do you think, basically to hire more police officers? Is that?
Absolutely. We have a recruitment and retention crisis in Vermont when it comes to our police. Some of the police departments have been actively defunded. The person I expect to be my opponent in November has voted 3 times to defund the police. Those to me are leadership disqualifying votes. This movement to malign, defund the police has coincided with a serious rise in violent crime in Vermont and across the country, and a serious rise in overdose deaths. Because unfortunately, business is good for drug dealers in Vermont these days because there are fewer police. I will always fund and support them.
Do you think the decline in the number of police officers and state police officers is directly tied to the Defund the Police campaign that emerged, I guess, in 2020, around the time of the George Floyd situation? That seems when that sort of really began to gather forth. Do you see that's the main reason, or are there other reasons?
It's absolutely the main reason. Police in Vermont, they tell me everywhere I go that they do not feel supported by their leaders. When someone like Congressman Welch votes 3 times to defund the police, that is crushing to the morale of our police in Vermont. The Burlington City Council slashed the headcount of the Burlington Police Department by 30%, arbitrarily and for no reason other than to advance this extreme far-left political agenda. I just received the endorsement of the Burlington Police Officers Association and the South Burlington Police Officers Association. They never make endorsements, but they know that this year we're at a tipping point and they need somebody who will speak out and support the police and celebrate their bravery and their heroism and get them funding, not defund them.
What about the idea of embedding social workers and mental health care workers in police departments, perhaps in lieu of uniformed officers, but that a social worker who's trained in de-escalating a potentially volatile situation might be better equipped to handle that situation than, let's say, a police officer who went through the normal training procedure?
I'm absolutely for adding those positions, but not taking away uniformed officers. So this is a question of getting more funding to the police. I do think we should have embedded social workers and mental health care workers, but we need uniformed officers who are trained to deal with these dangerous situations. They don't know what to expect when they walk up to a door to search a home. There was a story not long ago of FBI agents being shot in I believe it was Florida, executing a child pornography warrant for child exploitation offenses. We can't have our mental health care workers and social workers in those situations alone. They need full support. They need to be fully embedded with uniform officers.
Well, let's pivot from that to something I think sort of related to that, and recent concerns have emerged again around gun safety and gun control. Mm-hmm. These two horrible tragedies in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas, which brought that issue back again to the fore, to the extent that it ever went away in the first place. But I guess I just wondered, if you were elected, what would be your stance around that? Do you think that the legislation that recently passed through Congress that is aimed to enhance background checks and red flag laws, is that the answer, or should that just be seen as a first step towards, let's say, an assault weapons ban?
I think that's the answer right now. I think that was the right compromise to strike to promote public safety and also honor citizens' rights. And I think that one of the assets I can bring to bear as the next United States Senator is, from my time as U.S. Attorney, I know how to promote public safety while also supporting citizens' rights. So I think that legislation struck the right balance.
Okay. I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier in one of your earlier answers around immigration. And how hard it is for people to come here legally from other countries. My understanding is that one of the factors involved in that is that the State Department has lost so many people over the past 8-10 years that the staffing levels in embassies overseas and I suppose here in Washington as well, who process these folks or their applications to become citizens, there's just not enough of them to kind of move that through quickly enough. Is that your sense of it?
I'll take a look at it. I will take a look at anything, and I think this can be done in a very bipartisan way that can help us streamline our legal immigration process. My grandmother came through Ellis Island. We are a nation of immigrants, and we are in need of workforce right now. And so I'll take a look at any idea that can help to streamline that process.
Yeah, because it certainly seems like a process in need of streamlining, for sure, no question. Well, let me just draw upon your expertise in the legal area then, as well as and ask you to get for your reactions on some of these recent Supreme Court decisions we've been hearing a lot about. The obvious one is the one around reproductive rights that came down a week or so ago, the Dobbs case from Mississippi. What's your feeling about that? Was that a good decision? Or did it go off track some way or another?
I'm surprised by it. Roe versus Wade was a 50-year established precedent. It had been upheld once subsequent to it coming down. I am in the Senate. I will work to pass legislation that will preserve the right to abortion nationwide that was set forth in Roe versus Wade. I'm committed to doing that, and I think this can also be done in a bipartisan way.
So you think there's a realistic chance that the holding in Roe versus Wade could be enshrined in federal statute and be applied universally across all 50 states? I
do, and I think that you're going to need people in both parties who are willing to work toward that goal to make it happen.
Oh, clearly, because we don't seem to have that at the moment, as best I can tell anyway. Again, just hanging around on some of the recent decisions of the court, the one that seems to have had some resonance here in Vermont is the one case they made a ruling on a couple of weeks ago around educational funding. It grew out of a case in Maine. I think, which one is it here? Cassie versus Bacon or something like that. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but it seemed to open the doorway to allowing public funds to go to help finance tuition at religious schools. Mm-hmm. Was that the right decision, do you think?
I think that's a good public policy outcome. I think that we need to have access to education for all kids, and that includes kids whose parents have made a decision to bring them up or educate them in a religious setting or a setting that includes religious courses. I think students should be treated equally, and so I do think that that is a good outcome. By the way, I went to religious schools myself growing up, including Rice High School, as we discussed before we came online. Yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like it opened the door to restarting a conversation that I know is bubbled up occasionally in Vermont as to whether or not public money should follow students into independent schools. They may or may not be necessarily religious, and I suppose one of the things that could differentiate where that money could go is that could go to help support, sort of non-religious aspects to the school. So I guess it gets fairly complicated fairly quickly, but I'm sure we haven't heard the last of that yet. I wondered if we could turn maybe to some foreign policy questions.
Sure.
If you're elected, you'll wind up having to weigh in on a lot of things that are going on in the world right now, and I guess let's start with the situation in Ukraine. Do you think that so far the United States has played a very complicated situation as well as possible in terms of assisting the Ukrainians without kind of crossing over a line that could escalate the situation beyond that? Or is there something more or less that we should be doing?
So I want the Ukrainians to win this war. I think they've shown the power of the love of freedom. I think that the way they fought and their resilience shows what it means to love liberty and to love your country. And so I think that the free world needs to come together and keep giving them all the support we can, short of boots on the ground when it comes to the United States, to win this war. This is a battle of a despot versus the free world, and I'm very concerned if he wins, what's going to happen next. I would have put the sanctions on Russia sooner. I think that it took too long to put the sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline and other sanctions. I think that should have happened as soon as Putin started amassing troops on the border. And I would have canceled Russian oil purchases sooner. I called for that about 10 days before President Biden did. And I would be inclined to send those planes that the Ukrainians have been asking for. I don't understand an arbitrary distinction between defensive and offensive weapons in this context. The best defense is a good offense and vice versa.
Right. The sanctions, however, the economic sanctions, don't seem to have had the bite that I think a lot of people were expecting they were going to have back in February. I know the Russian gas and oil they're not being imported into Europe anymore, but it doesn't seem like they've had the same kind of impact that a lot of people were expecting.
I think they're having an impact because people thought that this war initially was going to take a matter of days, and look where we're at, weeks and weeks and weeks later. So I think they are having an impact, and I think we need to continue to support Ukraine. They're fighting as hard as they can. They're losing innocent lives, and they need us to stand with them.
And related to that, to a degree, I wonder what your thoughts are around how we ought to be relating to China. We have a very complicated relationship going on right now with China, it seems like. And the obvious tie with Ukraine is Taiwan or the Taiwan Strait. I suppose one could make. I've heard the argument made that if we're too weak in Ukraine, that it sends a signal to the Chinese that we can go finally grab Taiwan like we've wanted to do since 1949. Mm-hmm. What is your sense about how we should be approaching the Chinese? Should we be having some kind of discussions about how to kind of make our economic relationship a little bit more stable than it is right now, or what should be happening?
I think generally speaking, America needs to project strength abroad. I think it tells you all you need to know that Putin announced an alliance with Xi with China before he invaded Ukraine. And I think that tells you a lot about where China stands, along with some of the aggression it's been showing toward Taiwan. I'm also concerned about the precursor chemicals it's sending to Mexico so that Mexican cartels can manufacture fentanyl, which they are then sending to the United States, resulting in the death of 100,000 Americans a year. So I think we need to show strength to China, and I don't think that they're behaving like a friend right now.
Speaking of fentanyl and opioids, I mean, there's been a lot of legal activity, as I'm sure you're extremely well aware, over the past 4 or 5 years around that legal settlements with the big pharma companies. What more might we be able to do to help folks who are struggling with opioid addiction and just to restrict the supply of those chemicals into our communities?
I would say 3 things. We need to secure the border. That's number 1. The border is overrun with illegal crossings, human trafficking, and other activity, and it is reducing the capacity of the Border Patrol to seize the fentanyl that is coming into the United States and killing 215 Vermonters a year. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we need to have our police at full capacity. I know from doing federal cases over the years that so many of our important drug cases that hold accountable those who are selling deadly drugs for profit start at the local police level. They often pair up with federal agencies, or they start at the Vermont State Police level. Because their ranks are so decimated, they are not able to do these cases in the way they were before, and that's part of the reason for the overdose spike. And that's why we need to elect me, because I will fund and support the police, and I have their endorsement, unlike my opponent in November. Then we need to support our treatment and prevention communities. The surest way to stop overdoses in Vermont is for people either to not try drugs in the first place, or if they have, to seek treatment. I have met so many people who have overcome addiction. I've worked with them as a prosecutor, and I'm friends with some of them still. They have overcome addiction. There is hope, and we need to keep reminding people of that. We can make headway in this, but we can't give up. We can't give up.
Let me turn to another issue that's frequently in the news. That's climate change and the concerns about global warming and whatnot. There's been a lot of hope that Vermont and other states would be able to decrease its carbon emissions, may take steps to green up our economy. How do you see the goals that were set forth in the Global Warming Solutions Act the legislature passed last year as realistic, or are they possibly going to endanger the economy?
So that's a state bill, but what I will say, generally speaking, I am an environmentalist. I'm born and raised in Vermont. The most fun thing I did in my childhood was go to Lake Willoughby or Lake Champlain, Sandbar and Lake Willoughby, and these are treasures. This is such a blessing to be born in Vermont and to be raised in Vermont, because, in large part, because of our natural beauty. It's a big part of the reason I still live here, and I've lived here most of my life. So I'm an environmentalist. I believe in climate change. I would like to work in the tradition of Senator Leahy to get resources to Vermont to fund Lake Champlain cleanup and other forms of cleanup for our beautiful environment. And I would like to move toward renewable energies, but it's going to take some time. And we have to be honest with people about the time it's going to take. And we need to rely on our domestically produced energy, including oil and natural gas, especially at a time like this in the world as well.
Do you think we have the time to kind of be on a bit of a glide path towards that, or is your reading of the concerns around global warming such that the clock is ticking and hey, by 2030 or 2035 it's going to be too late? All those changes will be baked in and harder to reverse.
I reject alarmism and over-the-top rhetoric on either side, and I'm afraid we have a little bit too much of it these days, and that's part of the reason I'm running, to change that tone in Washington. I think we need to pursue an all-of-the-above approach to responsible American energy independence. This includes getting our electric grid ready to move toward renewable energy. It includes investments in the technology we need to move toward renewables, but we also need to, in an environmentally conscious and responsible way, rely on our own oil and natural gas in this country. We can't be reliant on dictators and despots and those who violate human rights for our energy in this country. And we can't do anything that would drive up prices at the pump. Vermonters are suffering terribly under the weight of the price at the pump and in the grocery store. It's a tax on them that they did nothing to deserve, and my heart breaks for them.
Why do you think it's so hard for Congress to act in a bipartisan, non-polarized kind of way? I mean, you've mentioned that if you were elected that you would want to work across the aisles and kind of come up with common sense, problem-solving solutions. Why is that so difficult, in your opinion, right now, apparently, from the outside, it seems, for that to happen?
I think some of them have been there too long, and I think it's time, and I think they've forgotten who they work for. They think they work for a political party, and including, nowadays, an extreme partisan agenda. On both sides, I'm seeing the parties move to the extreme. I'm seeing them focused on beating each other rather than on doing the work of the people. And I think what my goal is to go to Washington and engage in servant leadership and do what's best for people, not work for an extreme agenda. And that will include working with the other party. I did it every day as U.S. Attorney. I know it can be done in Washington, but we're going to need a new generation of leadership, some fresh perspective, and somebody who hasn't forgotten who they work for. That's the people of Vermont.
And last question before we have to run, the filibuster. Mm-hmm. Should that be tossed aside? I mean, it's nowhere in the Constitution written. It was a doctrine that evolved over the course of, I guess, the 19th century through Congress. And yet it seems right now it is one of those ideas that just stands in the way of any kind of legislation getting advanced because you can't get 60 votes in the Senate for anything.
I think the filibuster is one of the most important tools we have to make the parties work together, as I want to do. And if you elect something like me, things will get done because I can garner bipartisan consensus. I will not change my mind about this depending on which party is in charge. Unfortunately, my opponent in November changes his mind about the filibuster depending on which party is in charge. That is the kind of politics that's lacking in principle, that is really causing people to feel cynical about their elected leaders. I will have principle when it comes to this. It's an important tool to protect the minority view and to promote bipartisanship, which we desperately need.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, Ms. Nolan. But again, thank you very much for making the time for our conversation today. I really appreciate that. And well, good luck out there on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's great to be here.
And great to have all of you with us as well. I hope you found our program interesting and informative. And well, we'll see you again the next time. We still have several more candidates to talk with before we get to the August 9th primary. Anyway, meanwhile, have a great day. Thank you very much.